Welcome back. President Joe Biden has extended the federal pause on evictions through March 31st. What does this mean for Bronx tenants? What other protections are local elected officials fighting to pass for you at a city level? Joining us now to share more about Intro 2050, a bill seeking to provide right to counsel for all tenants subject to eviction proceedings, are Councilmember of District 16, Vanessa Gibson, and Councilmember of District 7, Mark Levine. Welcome. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Of course. So first to start off, I'd like to get into the extension of the eviction moratorium. It was set to expire last month, January, and it's now been extended to March. What does this mean for Bronxites, Councilmember Gibson?
So thank you so much for having myself and Councilmember Mark Levine on to always talk about an issue that we're so passionate about, right to counsel, and how we continue to affirm that affordable housing is truly essential and it should be a guarantee for so many New Yorkers. Recognizing with this new administration under the leadership of President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, essentially the federal eviction moratorium is providing minimal relief for tenants. So it essentially is just providing a delay in what we believe is the inevitable. And that is a groundswell of thousands of evictions right in the city of New York that we know will happen over the next several weeks. And so it's really important that as a city, we are prepared. If you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. And we really have to make sure that as a city, we are ready. We are ready with civil legal service providers, with legal representation, because at the end of the day, we know that for our borough of the Bronx, 1 in 4 households have lost their income. They've lost their jobs due to the COVID-19 pandemic. They've fallen behind rent and not really been able to meet the necessities like food, like keeping a roof over your head. And so we have to protect these residents. We have to keep them out of the shelter system, provide that stability that they need. And so by introducing 2050 at the city council and providing for a universal approach to the right to counsel law that was codified in 2017, we are sending a message across the city that no matter what zip code you live in, no matter how much is in your bank account, but if you are behind in rent, you should be entitled to free legal representation as you face that eviction.
Right. Thank you so much, Councilmember Gibson. And speaking of Intro Bill 2050, let's have Councilmember Levine chime in here and tell us a little bit more about this bill and what it seeks to accomplish for Bronx tenants.
Thank you, Sonia. I'm really pleased to be here and pleased to be with my colleague, Councilmember Gibson, who's just been an incredible leader on tenants issues and especially on access to counsel. So working with her has really been a great pleasure. And as the councilmember mentioned, we're facing a potential avalanche of evictions, something on a scale that we haven't seen potentially ever in the city, maybe in the Great Depression, but could be tens of thousands. And even the current state eviction moratorium has a requirement that tenants who want to avoid an eviction file a hardship declaration. And so it's important to mention a new resource, which Vanessa knows well, a way that for free you can file your declaration online. It's called evictionfreeny.org. And some of the great activists that Vanessa and I work with are behind it. So that's a good resource for your viewers. But we want to make sure that at the time when the eviction moratorium is up, we want to delay that as much as possible. But when that does happen, that nobody, no tenant, no vulnerable tenant in the Bronx, in New York City, in anywhere in the 5 boroughs will have to face an eviction without the benefit of an attorney. And to do that, we need to accelerate the existing program that provides attorneys. And the law that Vanessa and I and others passed a couple of years ago is a game change in housing court, but it's going in zip code by zip code because it's a very big city. It's a 5-year process. And we've gotten a lot of key zip codes in the Bronx and every borough, but we want to go immediately to every zip code in all 5 boroughs, every zip code in the Bronx, North Bronx, South Bronx, Northeast, I mean, everywhere, and all 5 boroughs. And so that's the purpose of this legislation that we are pushing. It's Intro 2050. It would immediately amend the existing law for right to counsel to go to every zip code right now. And that's going to be critical for that moment when we face this avalanche of evictions so that everyone has a benefit of an attorney. We had a hearing on it about 2 weeks ago, which was great. And we just want to bring this home by passing the law as soon as possible.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Levine. And if you can, either of you can emphasize on the importance of ensuring that no cases move forward without an attorney, especially with this avalanche of evictions, as you both mentioned.
Go ahead, Vanessa.
Well, I think what we've seen by universal rights to counsel that was passed back in 2017, we've seen evictions reduced by almost 40%. We've seen a reduction in the number of cases filed in housing courts in New York City. So I think we've shown and we've demonstrated with numbers that legal representation works. We have balanced the scales of justice in housing court. We've given tenants a fair opportunity. Many of them have shown up at housing court previously without an attorney, signing stipulations, not understanding, not being able to comply, huge language barriers in housing court, not being able to meet with attorneys, no privacy space, no confidentiality. I mean, if you visit Bronx, Brooklyn, Manhattan housing court before COVID, it was a zoo, literally, and people were trying to figure out how to navigate this process. So we believe that, again, it reduces shelter stay. It reduces the burden on government to house a homeless family. And at the rate of saying that affordable housing is a fundamental right, and it should be recognized as such. And we have to keep families in their homes because a big part of their stability is having a roof over your head so that you can take care of you and your family. So I think the data is clear, and it's shown, that we've looked at neighborhoods that are facing gentrification and displacement. And we've looked at, populations of low income tenants and immigrant families that have really faced the harsh realities of what an unequal court system has always been for generations. So as Mark said, this has been a game changer. And I'm so proud. New York City was the first and largest municipality to implement universal right to counsel. And now we've seen San Francisco, Baltimore, Newark. We've seen Cleveland, Boulder, Colorado. We've seen all these localities follow suit, and more to come. And we're seeing, conversations at the state level in Albany on a national level. I think this is a fundamental part of the quality of life that every American should enjoy. The ability to stay in your home and not feel the burden, rent burden tenants. Many of our tenants, they spend more than 30% of their income towards rent. And so we have to really change the atmosphere in which we're doing work. And by passing Intro 2050, we're not only recognizing that universal right to counsel is important, but we're recognizing in the middle of a global pandemic that it's even more important to protect tenants and keep them in their homes.
And what are the next steps and calls to action to get this bill passed? What do you urge your constituents to do at this time to help expedite its passing?
Well, thank you. We need as many co-sponsors on the bill as possible. So it's really helpful when council members hear from people who live in their district, because that's who matters. So reach out to your council member, wherever you are in the Bronx or beyond. And first, if they're on, you could ask, are you sponsoring or co-sponsoring Intro 2050 to expand right to counsel? And if the answer is yes, thank them, because people need to be thanked for taking the right position. And if the answer is no, then ask them to please get on as a co-sponsor. This really is important. That's how we know whether a bill has momentum. We ultimately passed the original right to counsel legislation because, correct me if I'm wrong, Vanessa, I think we got to like 42 co-sponsors in the body out of 51. You can't stop a bill with that kind of momentum. And we want that for Intro 2050. So check your local council member, let them know you need this to happen. And I think Vanessa said very powerfully, you have to start this work now so that we're not in the middle of a crisis in a couple of months and realize, oh no, some tenants don't have attorneys. So it's great that you're focusing on this now on Bronx Neck, because we want to work this out while we have a little more time ahead of this avalanche of evictions.
Yeah, we're happy to have you both, and thank you for your leadership in passing this bill and getting this bill to Bronx tenants and tenants across the board. No, I also wanted to ask you both, when are housing courts set to reopen, and what do you expect that will look like here, especially at the Bronx Housing Court?
That's a good question. So we in the city are having conversations now with OCA, the Office of Court Administration, and that really oversees all of our courts in New York State. And, we have to be very careful about our reopening plan. And I understand people need to get back to work. But while courts have been closed, a lot of the work that has proceeded in terms of other cases, illegal lockouts, and other cases before housing court have been done remotely. And I'm okay with that because I remember housing court pre-pandemic, and I don't want that return to the Bronx or any other court in New York City or New York State for that matter. So I think we have to have a real comprehensive plan. And once the vaccine continues to be expanded and many New Yorkers are getting the vaccine, and once we feel like things are back to, new normalcy, I think we really have to look at capacity. We cannot allow these courts to be jam-packed with clients and lawyers from floor to floor. It cannot happen. So we have to look at capacity. We have to look at limitations. And maybe what can happen is time frame. So if someone has to go to court, you have a certain time frame. And then if you are not able to adhere to that, then you will come on another day. We have to prevent the flow of traffic and walk-in traffic, to be honest, and provide some opportunity where there's appointment only and where we are looking at capacity issues so we do not have overcrowding. Because unfortunately, we've not been able to relocate housing courts. There is a plan, but we're a few years out of that to move some of our housing courts to other locations. Specifically, the Bronx is supposed to move to the Supreme Court building at 851 Grand Concourse, but we are years out of that. And so absent of having additional space, I think we have to look at capacity and some of the guidelines that we will put in place.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Councilmember Gibson and Councilmember Levine. Before we go, earlier we just spoke with a Bronx tenant who received an eviction notice from a new landlord in his building. Luckily, he and his neighbors knew their rights, and the owner wound up apologizing and redacting this notice. Luckily, but not everyone knows their rights as tenants. If you can just remind our viewers and your constituents of their rights and their protection under the eviction moratorium at this time, that would be very helpful.
I mean, this is such an important point. When tenants don't know their rights, don't know they have support from an attorney, they can be intimidated and harassed by landlords. And often they're scared to stand up because they're worried that the landlord could evict them. And so in addition to expanding access to counsel, it is critical that we inform tenants, that we are out there building by building, even door by door, informing tenants that you have rights, that this is a new era in housing court where tenants have access to attorneys in ways they never did. And that means that if your landlord files a frivolous eviction case against you, that it's not going to go anywhere. And as for this specific moment, there's an across the board moratorium on new evictions now through March. But what really matters, I think, for the next few months is a pandemic-based pause on evictions through, I think, May 1st. It does require, as I mentioned, that you file a hardship declaration. It's actually not that hard. It's one form to fill out. It's available in Spanish. And there's a free service online. They'll actually fill out and they'll hard copy mail it for you. It's no cost. It's really an incredible service. And it's, I mentioned the website before, but it's evictionfreeny.org. So if you are facing a possible eviction and you've been impacted by the pandemic, and let's be honest, we've all been impacted by this pandemic, if you just fill out that form, then you will be protected from eviction through May.
Thank you. Thank you both so much again for joining us today and sharing this great information with our viewers.
Sonyi, it's a great pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, Sonia.
Thank you. Again, folks, you can protect yourself from eviction in New York State by visiting the resource provided by Councilmember Levine today. Thank you for that resource at evictionfreeny.org. Thank you, Councilmember Gibson and Councilmember Levine, for being great leaders and joining us today to share more about your Intro 2050 bill. We'll be right back.